Regardless, it's gonna be so dangerous at that base. Obviously. Wait. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!
That is the case, so.
As you certainly know by now, early Sunday morning there was another senseless shooting, this time at a dance club in Orlando, Florida. A dance club. It left 49 people dead, which is the largest loss of life due to a terrorist attack on U.S. soil since 9/11.
The United States government has many definitions for terrorism.
Terrorism is the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives.
Religious, or ideological. Within this definition, there are three key elements: violence, fear, and intimidation. And each element produces terror and its victims.
There are two types of terrorism: religious and secular. Religious terrorism is the most common and most destructive. People who practice religious terrorism find violence is the first and foremost a sacramental act or divine duty, is a direct response to some theological demand, unconstrained by political or moral or practical constraints. These people see themselves as activists fighting for their own cause. Religious terrorists see themselves not as components of a system worth preserving, but outsiders seeking fundamental changes in an existing order. Sense of alienation also allows religious terrorists to contemplate for more destructive and deadly types of terrorist operations. Secular terrorism rarely attempts to indiscriminate killing on a massive scale because such tactics are not consistent with their political aims and therefore are regarded as counterproductive. Secular terrorists also attempt to appeal to a group of variously composed of actual and potential sympathizers. Members of these communities also believe these groups are defending or speaking for people who claim to not have a voice. Lack of religion in secular terrorists leads to limitless violence against a virtually open-ended category of targets. People who practice secular terrorism use dehumanizing terms like infidel, dogs, children of Satan, and mud people. This makes the victim subhuman or unworthy of living. Regard to violence is a way of intersegregating the correction of a flaw in a system that is basically good, or as a means to format the creation of a new system.
There are many different types of terrorism. Suicide bombing has become the most deadly form of terrorism. This type of terrorism is the easiest and most effective for the group that is completing it. No switch or detonation is needed to perform a suicide bombing. These people have access to well-guarded targets, can kill a large amount of people all at once, and terrify the enemy in a short period of time. The U.S. is currently working on a profile for a suicide bomber in order to prevent these attacks from happening so frequently. This is a global threat and needs to be stopped. Another form of terrorism that is becoming more frequently used is cyberterrorism. Cyberterrorism is defined as the politically motivated use of computers and information technology to cause severe disruption or widespread fear in society. The rise of cyberterrorism correlates with the rise of technology in the U.S. This can cause severe financial damage along with hacking into governmental information. The threat posed by cyberterrorism has grabbed the attention of the mass media, the security community, and the information technology industry. Journalists, politicians, and experts in a variety of fields have popularized a scenario in which sophisticated cyberterrorism electronically break into computers that control dams or air traffic control systems, and etc. The more technologically developed a country is, the more vulnerable it becomes.
When a person is afraid, the brain releases specific chemicals. The individual feels specific sensations and manifests specific behavioral reactions that are not present with other primary emotions, like anger or satisfaction. Fear results from social interaction when the person is made to feel powerless and subject to the will of others. Although fear is pre-existing in human nature, The intense fear of terrorism stems from someplace deeper. It is fear that is exaggerated by media outlets, causing individuals to be afraid of the wrong things. USA Today elaborated on a survey conducted after the San Bernardino, California mass shooting, where the findings stated that 96% of U.S. adults see terrorism as a critical or an important concern. According to the same survey, 4 years prior, that number was only 75%, and nearly half, 47%, say that they are very or somewhat worried that they or someone in their family will be victim of terrorism. We see that society is at a micro level, and that society is made up of small interactions between individuals and groups to share values. However, when it comes to attacks on America, society is quick to change and look at the perpetrators, and then begin their opinions based on what they find. This is how we saw the American people begin to stereotype Muslims.
Since 9/11, American Muslims have become the center of attention as American non-Muslims anticipate Islamic violent radicalization and terrorism. Avoidance behavior and aggression towards the generalized population of American Muslims has opened a new level of terrorism. Some people watching these events on television may actually have excessive fears of future attacks. They may have nightmares, they might find themselves suddenly startled for no apparent reason, and they may come to fear people who look like they are Muslims. When generalized stress decreases, American Muslims become stereotyped and outcasted, increasing their stress on an individual and communal level, as they are targeted by the government and other citizens. This turn into a culture of Islamophobia and anti-immigrant have created an identity crisis in American Muslims while they become the new target of terrorism. Socioeconomic factors indeed play a role in terrorism. Socioeconomic factors indeed play a role in terrorism. Considering the levels of disadvantage many Western Muslims experience, it is not surprising that many Muslim communities find themselves treated unfairly. Just by flipping through newspapers, it's no surprise to see the Muslim community anxious of vigilante terrorism, also known as hate crimes. Under the anxiety of potential terrorist attack, terrorism would be seen as functional since allying against it create a sense of belongingness in a group and enhance in group solidarity and cohesiveness. As citizens join together, group solidarity would help preserve freedom and democracy. An unwanted consequence of group solidarity would be racist groups committing hate crimes against the Muslim and Muslim look-alike cultures based on stereotypes and predispositions.
Without proper coping methods, terrorism is not the only social problem present, but America's anxiety affects Americans on a social and individual level. The annual chance of being killed in a terrorist attack committed by refugees is 1 in 3.6 billion a year. By comparison, your chance of being murdered by anyone is 1 in 14,000. In other words, your chance of being murdered is 253 times as great as dying in a terrorist attack committed by a foreigner on U.S. soil. From these numbers, the reality of this problem comes into perspective. Americans' fears of terrorism are extremely high for something with such little probability. Americans fear the concept of terrorism at a rate much higher than the rate of terrorist attacks that actually happen. Given the fact that this fear is what the real problem is, the solution is difficult, but the first step is to identify the causes of this fear.
When we look at terrorism, we need to view it as a multi-sided issue. There are many influences such as history, a country's foreign policy, racial stereotyping, and social interactions. Many solutions people have to terrorism are through violent approaches. These solutions end up feeding into violent acts of terrorism. As a collective group of students, we believe that non-violent approaches should be taken to prevent terrorism and to educate the masses. During this project, we wanted to create signs on Appian Way that spoke to the local community. One sign, Bag Bang, lets our audience know that if you see an unattended bag, to report it and to be cautious. Just like when you are at an airport, bags should not be unattended due to unknown threats. Our next sign, hashtag See Something, Say Something, brings attention to suspicious terrorist activity. It also ties in nicely with Bag Bang. The third sign, Anti-Terrorism Awareness, ties all the signs together and informs our audience of what their purpose is. The signs were laid out on the computer, and the code was written to then cut them on the laser machine. We then worked with the local campus authorities to figure out the proper application methods. In this case, we used water-soluble chalk. This was our group's attempt at a local terrorism awareness campaign. There are other anti-violence solutions. According to one author, Dustin V. of Counterterrorism with Nonviolence, he claims that most terrorists lack education, are unemployed, they experience a social injustice and are threatened by social inequality. As a leading political power and country, the U.S. should invest more in implementing education and establishing jobs in areas where terrorists are centrally located. One example is in the workings of an NGO, non-governmental organization. They provided education to a well-known terrorist district in India, and the findings revealed a decrease in terrorist activity. Some actions we can take towards this is by voting in politicians-representatives that promote non-violent anti-terrorism solutions. Also, reallocating the $600 billion spent on military spending to foreign policy implications will assist in non-violent terrorism movements.